Well, well, well. I was wondering if you'd have the guts to show up.
No one else.
You know you don't have to act with me, Steve. You don't have to say anything, and you don't have to do anything. Not a thing. Oh, maybe just whistle. You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.
The Hollywood Interview. Lauren Bacall. Lauren Bacall has been a screen icon since her 1944 debut in Howard Hawks' To Have and Have Not, which also brought her together with her first husband, the equally iconic Humphrey Bogart, setting the stage for one of Hollywood's great romances. Now an 83 years young dynamo, Lauren Bacall was born Betty Jean Persky in New York City on September 16, 1924. A veteran performer of over 60 films and television productions, Miss Bacall is also a two-time Tony Award-winning actress for her two triumphant turns on Broadway, in Applause and Woman of the Year, both of which, ironically enough, are musicals based on classic movies. Miss Bacall makes her 67th film appearance as a high society matron in Paul Schrader's The Walker, a murder mystery set among the elite of Washington, D.C., starring Woody Harrelson in the title role as the Walker, or escort, for unaccompanied ladies. The film also features fine support from Kristen Scott Thomas, Lily Tomlin, Ned Beatty, and Willem Dafoe.
Don't let them get you down.
Well, I have had some illusions shattered.
We all have.
I thought we weren't an aggressor nation. I thought there was a separation between church and state. Hell, I even thought that the people elected the president.
Oh. You know, Carl, you've always intrigued me. You think you're a black sheep. You're not a black sheep at all.
Even the most seasoned and jaded journalists are faced with a subject who brings butterflies to the stomach, akin to what we felt at our first school dance. The prospect of chatting with the iconic Lauren Bacall had this effect on me. It was 2007, and Bacall had just finished work on Paul Schrader's The Walker, opposite Woody Harrelson. Our chat on the phone became one of the great conversations and personal connections of my life. Most journalists avoid phoners whenever possible, as a conversation via Alexander Graham Bell, or Verizon, is rarely as intimate or revealing as a one-on-one chat. Originally, I was to interview Miss Bacall, aka Betty to her friends, at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills. A longtime New Yorker who resided in the iconic Dakota apartment building, she had canceled all LA press due to a cold. Her publicist offered me 20 minutes on the phone as a consolation, and of course, I said yes. Long story short, 20 minutes turned into 90. Several times, Miss Bacall's publicist cut in, telling her our time was up, until finally she said, as only she could,
Richard.
Not his real name.
I will tell you when we are through.
Needless to say, we had no further interruptions after that point. She also insisted that I address her as Betty and not Miss Bacall.
You're a very intelligent young guy, and I think we could be friends. My friends call me Betty.
It was one of only 2 or 3 phone interviews, out of hundreds I've done, where I really felt like I met the person I was conversing with. When we finally did have to sign off, Betty thought I had hung up and proceeded to regale her publicist with some of the nicest compliments about yours truly I've ever heard. The fact that they were coming from such an iconic figure put wind in my sails that helped buoy me through difficult times to this day. When I chimed in and said, Betty, I'm still on the line, she roared with laughter and said,
Well, you must come visit me in New York sometime and we'll have dinner. Are you single?
I hope the gulp that I heard come from my throat wasn't audible on her end, but recently divorced, I responded in the affirmative.
You looking for some action?
Isn't everyone? I said. More throaty laughter ensued from the Dakota.
I know a lot of terrific young women. Get yourself to New York.
And with that, our conversation ended. Sadly, the dinner and the visit never came to pass, for many reasons I won't bore you with. Suffice to say, I did meet and truly click with the great Lauren Bacall, and I'm positive I could pass the most assiduous polygraph that would try to prove otherwise.
We were talking about your wanting to be a black sheep. In the end, all you have is your breeding. It's all that separates them from us.
Breeding. My great-grandfather got rich off slavery, and when the Yankees took that away, my grandfather made his money raising tobacco. I don't have any breeding.
If your great-grandfather were alive today, he'd fit right in.
One thing that struck me while watching The Walker were all the parallels between Washington, D.C. and Hollywood. Did you find that as well?
That's interesting. I think that Hollywood, just the name, has been misused over the years, so that everyone in Southern California is in Hollywood when nobody is. Hollywood has come to mean something else, usually negative. I just thought of this story as being uniquely Eastern, which of course Washington, D.C. is. And D.C. in many ways is very much like the character of the Walker. I think in most big cities the same thing exists, some odd guy who will escort a woman who's on her own.
Well, I guess I was thinking more in terms of the tenuous nature of relationships in both cities, what friendships are based on, and how the definition of what constitutes friendship constantly seems to shift, depending on where you happen to lie on the chessboard at the time.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But I think the values are entirely different there. In Washington, it's all about power plays and games. They love to play games there. One tries to outdo the other and always wants to know what the other one is doing. There's a scene where the Woody Harrelson character leans forward to Kristen Scott Thomas and he says, "They're looking at me now because they're all wondering what I'm saying to you." And it's true. That is very much the political scene. Although I don't really consider it a political movie.
No, it's very much of a social commentary disguised as a murder mystery.
Yes, and it's very stylish too. It's got a wonderful cast of people, and very classy people. Paul Schrader writes very well.
I think he's one of our great screenwriters. When I interviewed him a few years ago, I told him he was America's cinematic sociologist.
What did he say?
Well, he laughed and said, well, I never thought of myself that way, but now that you mention it.
I agree with you. That's funny.
Most of your scenes are with Woody Harrelson in the film. What was he like as a scene partner?
I liked him very much. He has a quality I admire tremendously. He's a total professional. He always is prepared, always gives serious thought to what he's doing. And he's a really nice guy. We all got along amazingly well. Lily Tomlin and I are now bosom buddies.
Who was the girl, Steve?
Who was what girl?
The one who left you with such a high opinion of women.
Can we talk for a moment about Mr. Bogart?
What have you got in mind?
Well, you said something very interesting in your first memoir, which was he wasn't a tough guy at all, in spite of the types of roles he played.
He was a very gentle soul. He was very strong and very sure about what he believed in and what he thought was important and not important. He couldn't be pushed around. But he was a gentle man. I was very, very lucky to have even met him, much less have been married to him. He had extraordinary gifts. He was much more of a complete individual than most people are. He had the kind of standards my mother had. Their values were very much the same. It was very interesting. He had tremendous character and a great sense of honor and would not tolerate lies, even if they asked him what he thought of a movie. Oh, we were once at a screening at somebody's house, I forget whose, and they ran a movie that he was in that he never thought much of. Afterward, the producer asked what he thought of it, and Bogey said, "I think it's a crock." And the producer was horrified. He was about to release the movie, and he said to Bogey, "Why would you say that?" Bogey shrugged and said, "Then don't ask me." He never played the schmoozing game. He was not into that at all.
None of that surprises me because his acting was very honest, and he always played very straightforward characters.
That's right. That's who he was. But he was also sentimental and romantic. He had all those other qualities that were irresistible, and he was highly intelligent. He was an avid reader. He was also a great, great chess player. I mean, a major chess player.
You know, I don't see what there is to be cagey about, Mr. Marlowe. And I don't like your manners.
Well, I'm not crazy about yours. I didn't ask to see you. I don't mind if you don't like my manners. I don't like them myself. They're pretty bad. I grieve over them long winter evenings, and I don't mind your ritzing me or drinking your lunch out of a bottle. But don't waste your time trying to cross-examine me.
People don't talk to me like that.
Oh.
Well, speaking of horses, I like to play them myself. But I like to see them work out a little first. See if they're front runners or come from behind. Find out what their whole card is. What makes them run.
Find out mine?
I think so.
Go ahead.
I'd say you don't like to be rated. You like to get out in front. Open up a lead, take a little breather in the back stretch, and then come home free.
The two of you were very outspoken against the House Un-American Activities Committee, along with many others, including Danny Kaye and John Huston.
Yes, and this was before Joseph McCarthy. This was J. Parnell Thomas, who, it turned out, was a crook and had his entire family on the payroll. It was a nightmare. He was a congressman from New Jersey. He was the one who thought up the HUAC. He was an awful, awful man.
An awful man and an awful time. And there are many parallels between that time and the time in which we're currently living.
Yes, the times in which we're currently living, unfortunately, our great leader is such a disaster, and the entire country's in disastrous shape because of him. It's very frightening, actually, to think that this country has become what it's become, and that so many people voted for a man like that. It's terrifying.
Do you think we're ready to have a female president?
Absolutely. Why not? Women have proven already that they have as much information and are as intelligent as men and are every bit as gung-ho for any kind of work. I myself just haven't made a decision yet. It's too early. We have an entire year yet of campaigning coming up, and it's already exhausting.
Well, I'm still hoping Al Gore will pull a Bobby Kennedy and throw his hat into the ring late.
That would be great, but I don't think he will. Why should he? He doesn't need that now. He's been so recognized for the kind of man he is and all the things he's accomplished. He was talking about global warming 30 years ago. We'd all like to see him run, but I don't think it's going to happen.
You were friendly with RFK, weren't you?
Oh, I adored him. We'd have a different country now if he'd lived. What a tragedy that was. I knew him and Ethel fairly well, and knew he was capable of changing himself and evolving to such a degree. There was always something so touching about him, so moving. He really had feelings and was able to express them. And what he believed in would have brought so much to America, so much more quality that we've been living in the middle of for quite some time. Why would they shoot someone like him? Or Jack Kennedy, for that matter? Why would they do something like that?
It sometimes seems as though if a person becomes too evolved, they check out or they're taken out.
Yes. And the madmen seem to live on forever, don't they?
Let's go back to some of the people you've worked with over the years. Why don't we start with the man who discovered you, Howard Hawks.
Marvelous, marvelous director of tremendous variety. If you think of the quality of the movies that he made and how different each of them were and how fantastic they all were, and he had a great sense of the motion picture, of the photography, of the shape of the screen, of the actors. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I was so lucky, and would have remained so lucky if I hadn't fallen in love with Mr. Bogart, because he washed his hands of me the minute that happened. He couldn't control me anymore. He was a control freak.
I'd say things still worked out pretty well in your favor.
Absolutely. I wouldn't change a thing.
Hollywood is very glamorous and expensive. At the Hollywood Interview, we must buy many martinis and cigars in order to maintain our image on the Walk of Fame. If you enjoy the stars and artists you hear on the Hollywood Interview, please consider becoming a patron. You can become a patron by going to patreon.com/The Hollywood Interview. Patrons receive exclusive access to interview notes, bonus episodes, and soon-to-be-announced swag. Because swag is the real reason we all make movies. What about Ernest Hemingway?
Hemingway was an odd guy. He was a big boozer, as you know, but I didn't know him well, but had dinner with him one night in Spain when I was on location for a movie, and I was taken there by Slim Hawks, who was then married to Leland Hayward and had known Hemingway since she was a kid. So much of Hemingway was phony. He flirted with women with his wife sitting right there, and he always said, "Oh, honey, just call me Papa." He wrote wonderfully, but the way he spoke, he was always kind of batting his eyes at you. It was an odd experience, really. I was very excited to meet him, and Bogey always wanted to do The Old Man and the Sea because he loved the story and he loved the sea so much. But again, I didn't really know him well, but I think he was not great with women. Martha Gellhorn, Hemingway's third wife, was a great friend of mine, and she's the only one who never really talked about him publicly, interestingly enough.
What about William Faulkner?
Oh, he was adorable. He was this great writer, and Howard Hawks had known him before and always gave him a job because Howard knew that Faulkner was always broke. Faulkner had so many wonderful eccentricities. Did you ever hear the story about when he asked the studio bosses if he could work at home instead of the writers' building at the studio?
No, what happened?
Well, the studio was very excited to have him working on this movie, but after a couple of weeks, they hadn't received any material for him. And Faulkner said, "Do you mind if I work at home? I just can't concentrate here at the studio." The studio said, "Sure." And that's exactly what Faulkner did. He went home to Mississippi. He was a really lovely, very shy man, and an alcoholic, as many writers have been. But he was always glad to see all of us. We were always in Rome at the same time. He was working on a Howard Hawks movie, Land of the Pharaohs, when Harry Curtis, who was another wonderful writer and a great friend of mine, went to Rome and wanted to see Faulkner. So he found out where Faulkner was staying and opens the door, and this white uniform flashes by quickly, obviously a nurse. And there's Faulkner in bed, just coming off a bender. And he looks up at Harry, who says, "Hi, Bill, how you doing?" Faulkner said, "Well, hello, Harry, I'm fine, but I just can't seem to shake this cold." He never talked about the booze. He was marvelous. I have so many stories about him, but that would be going far into left field, so let's stay focused.
Fair enough. I know that you and Kirk Douglas have had a long, enduring friendship, going back to your days at the American Academy of Dramatic Art in New York. In fact, you both appeared together in the film Diamonds a few years back.
Yes. I was 15 when I first met Kirk. He is amazing. At 90, he's still writing books. Just extraordinary when you think what he's been through physically with the stroke. He's a real character. And when I knew him was a womanizer beyond being a womanizer. I mean, he was so over the top, but he was so attractive and just a wonderful actor. I had such a crush on him when I was a kid. And of course, he made passes at me because that's what he did with nearly every woman he met. But I was so young, I didn't know one pass from another.
In his first memoir, as I'm sure you know, he says that you were the only one of the young ladies during that period who managed to hang on to her virtue after going out with him, and he admired you for that.
That's right, but God knows he tried. I gave him my uncle's overcoat because he was so poor. He had no money at all. New York was and is freezing during the winter, and my favorite uncle had a couple of overcoats and one that he didn't wear very much. So I convinced my uncle to give it to me to give to Kirk. Kirk lived in a walk-up, 3 stories, And I carried that coat up 3 floors to give to him.
And he never forgot that either. He talked about that in The Ragman's Son.
No, he never forgot. He's a dear.
You had the rare privilege of being on location for The African Queen with Mr. Bogart, John Huston, and your good friend Katharine Hepburn. What was that like?
It was amazing. First of all, Africa was fabulous, and I loved every second of it. Unless I saw some creepy tarantula or snake, then I didn't love it so much. John Huston was, to me, a genius. I thought he was the best director of all. He always chose subjects that weren't what you would think of as commercial. They were never based on hit books or plays or anything like that. He did things that were interesting and fascinating. He was so wonderful to work with, and he was such a character. He and Bogey were really close pals. Anytime he made a movie, he wanted Bogey in it, and Bogey followed him blindly. Although John was not known for using locations that were comfortable, Bogey would go along with him in a second. They really liked each other a lot. John was unique in every possible way and a funny, funny guy. I remember one time we were all flying to Paris for the weekend. Katie, John, Bogey, and myself were on the plane from London. And Katie was going to meet the Canans, Garson Kanan and Ruth Gordon, and Spencer was there. So she was going to have a little rendezvous with those 4. In the hotel, we shared a suite. Bogey and I had 1 bedroom, and John had the other, with a joint living room. John was so hysterically funny, there are no words to describe it. How rare a thing it is to have someone like John with a brilliant mind, who is a great director, amazing actor, a wonderful writer, and really unusual, and then have him be wonderful company as well. Unpredictable, but always interesting. Just an amazing guy. I was lucky.
Do they even make people like Huston, Mr. Bogart, Miss Hepburn, or you anymore?
No, they don't. There aren't people like us anymore. The standards, the principles. It's all about money now, which makes me sick. I mean, I like money as much as anyone else, but I think this country has become so commercial, and my profession has become all about money. It's as if making $20 million a movie somehow makes you a better person, you know? Most of the great geniuses that are running the business now seem to think that. Huston's standards were very high when it came to his work. The work always came first, not the money.
After reflection, it wasn't such a joke, and I apologize.
You should. The only way you can show your repentance is to leave.
Well, that I cannot do.
Mr. Brooks, you are a notorious individual, utterly lacking in character or decency. You're an assassin.
It's going to which end of the gun you're on.
Rubbish. You lied to me. You made a fool of me. You took advantage of me. This house is all I have. When my lodgers find out who you are, they'll leave.
I have a cancer.
In The Shootist, you got to work with 2 of my all-time heroes, John Wayne and Don Siegel. Tell us about that.
Duke Wayne and I got along really well, considering that we didn't agree about anything. It was quite amazing. He was great to work with. He really liked me, and I really liked him. We had great chemistry together. But he was so awful to Don Siegel. He kept saying things like, "You call this a setup? What kind of director are you?" Duke wanted to direct the movie. He was a difficult boy. And Don Siegel was a wonderful director. I liked the movie a lot. And after all, Duke was a dying man making that movie. It was quite an experience.
As a teenager, you had a very fortuitous meeting with Bette Davis, didn't you?
Yes, I did. She was absolutely my idol growing up. I just worshipped her. She was the most amazing actress and had this quality about her that was unparalleled. And I still feel that way. My Uncle Jack had a friend named Robin who was Bette Davis's assistant. She was coming to New York, and Uncle Jack arranged a meeting for me and my best friend. So we went to her hotel. I think it was the Gotham Hotel. And I was so nervous. I was shaking from head to foot. My whole body was shaking. We went up to her suite and sat on the sofa in the living room. And suddenly, out comes Bette Davis with that walk. I thought I was going to keel over. Fortunately, I didn't. I said, I want to be an actress. And she told me that I'd have to work very hard. And the fact that she allowed us to be in her room and have a conversation with her was just amazing. We didn't have a very long time with her. She gave us tea, and I was afraid I was going to break the cup because I was shaking so badly.
Did you wind up getting to know her at all once you became a famous actress yourself?
No. Funnily enough, I never did. She was not easy to get to know. She was not a very warm, open, friendly woman. Katie Hepburn, for example, was a very warm, open, vulnerable woman. She was very easy to get to and to approach. When I was on the Warner Brothers lot even, she mentioned to Jack Warner that I should be cast in a film they were doing. Other than that, I never had any direct contact with her until much later. Also, after the meeting with her, I wrote a letter thanking her, and she wrote me back. That was pretty amazing, too.
Do you still have that letter?
I think I have it somewhere. I'm sure I kept it. But over the years, who knows, things fall through the cracks. But later, I was on Broadway in Applause, and of course, playing Margot Channing, which was her role in All About Eve, and which will always be her part, because it was on the screen, and the screen lasts forever, thanks to Martin Scorsese. So I feel a connection to her through that as well.
Well, on that note, let's talk about some of your stage work.
Well, Applause was certainly the highlight of it because it was my first musical, and I'd always wanted to do a musical.
And you won a Tony for your first musical.
Yes, and I won for Woman of the Year, too. Funnily enough, playing the part that Katie Hepburn played in the movie version, which came first.
I'm too exhausted to go to the party, but I'm much too excited to go home to sleep. I feel groggy and weary and tragic, punchy and bleary and fresh out of magic, but alive, but alive, but alive. I feel twitchy and bitchy and manic, calm and collected and choking with panic, but alive, but alive, but alive. Broadening my field of expertise, I wrote the book on how to be cool. I wrote the book on how to be strong. I wrote the book on how to interpret the news and never be wrong. I wrote the book on how to be tough. I wrote the book on how to be terse. I wrote the book on every subtextual phrase in Eliot's verse. I wrote the book on how to have class.
Does the process of working on stage and screen differ for you?
Well, the major difference is time. When you do a movie, it's a much shorter process, but you don't see the final product until a year or two later, and by then you moved on to other things. But on the stage, that's the real place for actors, because you have an immediate response from your audience. Doing 8 shows a week is difficult. It requires stamina and tremendous energy, and you really don't have room in your life for much else. But it is, I think, the most rewarding and gratifying way to be an actor because it's live and you connect with the audience.
Well, another great experience you had in the theater was being directed by the great playwright Harold Pinter in Tennessee Williams' Sweet Bird of Youth.
Oh, Harold is one of my heroes. I adore that man. That was the only time I've been lucky enough to speak the words of Tennessee Williams. That was the beginning of this wonderful friendship I've had with Harold over the years. Plus, opening in London was amazing because it's one of my favorite places in the world. It's the greatest theater city in the world. You can go to the National Theater and see 3 different plays. There's always something you want to see, although it's usually not playing when you're there. The other great thing about London, in my profession, they appreciate actors who are in flops. If someone was devoted to John Gielgud, they stayed that way, whether he was in a hit play or not. In America, if you're not number 1, 2, or 3 on the list, you're out. Move on to the next one.
You know, it's interesting. Every European actor and filmmaker I've interviewed has said the same thing. In the States, it's a business, and in Europe, it's a community.
Absolutely. They're interested in quality. They have standards and respect for the medium they're working in, whether it's in the movies or in the theater.
Was it a different experience being directed by someone who's also a writer, as Mr. Pinter is?
Well, I found that in other plays that I've been in that have been directed by someone other than the writer always has to be there in case something needs to be changed or to make sure that you don't change anything. But Harold, being the great writer that he is, was meticulous about sticking to the script of Tennessee Williams. Harold had tremendous respect for his words, as he should have.
You also got to work with the great Robert Altman twice. Tell us about Brother Bob.
He was extraordinary, a unique talent. He knew what he wanted, and his choices were fascinating because his point of view came from another place, much different than most of us have. I think the sad thing is that health was not paid more attention to because it was perfectly timed with the election of Ronald Reagan, and it also involved the characters of Adlai Stevenson and Dwight Eisenhower. I had a great time on that, but unfortunately Pret-a-Porter was not so good, and he was not in good health when they were doing that. There was some great moments in it, though. He was an original.
And another original you've worked with recently is Lars von Trier.
I'll say.
Well, what was that experience like?
Well, he's another real character. You had to unlearn everything you'd learned about working in movies, working with Lars. He was holding the camera all the time, so you never knew if you were in the scene or not in the scene. And there were no sets. It was all drawn out on the soundstage, on the floor. It was a fascinating experience. I finally liked it very much, but we all felt kind of peculiar initially because we didn't understand the way he wanted to do it until we realized. But he's a very talented man. I loved Breaking the Waves, which was an amazing film, and why I was so thrilled when he asked me to do Dogville. It's funny, a lot of people still ask me what that film was about. I always say, don't ask me, ask Lars.
Grace.
Yes. Oh. I didn't see that you just raked the path. I'm sorry.
It isn't that I just raked it. The idea is for people to pass around the bushes completely. I prefer it that way, as you should know.
I thought that these chains were put up to make a path between the bushes.
They were put up there to protect the bushes. It's not supposed to be a pathway.
But everyone goes this way.
Yeah, that's right. They've been living here for years. You haven't been here that long.
You've certainly seen films and filmmaking change quite a bit since you began in 1944.
Yes, it has, and they have. I wish there wasn't so much violence in films today. I saw 2 films recently, There Will Be Blood and American Gangster. Both very good films, but they were so violent. With all the violence in the world and with all the dialogue about decreasing violence, why are movies so violent?
We're living in a violent time, and I think that art, especially film, holds up a mirror to the time in which they're made. Look at the films of the late 60s and early 70s. Bonnie and Clyde, The Wild Bunch, Straw Dogs, A Clockwork Orange, The Godfather. All those films were emblematic of the time in which they were made.
Yes, that's true. And now, the time we're living in is under a government that doesn't care about art, any kind of art, whether it's painting or sculpture or the performing arts. You don't think George Bush gives a goddamn about any of that, do you? The main problem is that the government that represents us reflects itself in the art that the country creates. And there's certainly nothing that encourages creativity in this bloody government. It can't get any worse, I don't think.
Any final thoughts?
Well, I hope that I keep my health. And I hope that we elect a decent president, because I can't stand the thought of living with more of this kind of horror that we've been living with now for so many years. It's so disgraceful. And why Bush wasn't impeached immediately, I'll never understand. By the way, if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm a liberal, the L word.
Lauren Bacall continued working to the end, succumbing to a stroke on August 14, 2014, a month shy of her 90th birthday. Please go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. We really want to hear from you and get your reactions, and the more ratings we get, the better this podcast can become. Also, visit us on Facebook. I look forward to reading your comments, and I will get right back to you. Lauren Bacall was played by Darren Warren. For more information, please go to darrenwarren.com or see the show notes for this episode. The Hollywood Interview was produced and edited by Connell O'Hurley. This is a production of No One Else Media and Wanderer Productions. I'm Alex Simon. For complete transcripts of this interview, please go to thehollywoodinterview.com. Hollywood is very glamorous and expensive. At the Hollywood Interview, we must buy many martinis and cigars in order to maintain our image on the Walk of Fame. If you enjoy the stars and artists you hear on the Hollywood Interview, please consider becoming a patron. You can become a patron by going to patreon.com/The Hollywood Interview. Patrons receive exclusive access to interview notes, bonus episodes, and soon-to-be-announced swag. Because swag is the real reason we all make movies.